Here we go. So good evening from Israel, everybody. This is Jonathan Feldstein. I have the privilege of serving as president of the Genesis 123 Foundation. And just by way of background, if you haven't been with us before and not familiar with what we do, or you have been and you forgot, our mission is to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new and unique and meaningful. We do so with mutual respect, but from our respective traditions. So sometimes we as Jews speak about things that Christians don't understand and vice versa, and that's good. We're coming at it from a perspective of mutual respect, and we're so grateful that this program, Inspiration from Zion, has been for almost a year now, a staple of how we're building bridges and the interaction that we've been able to develop. Initially, the idea last year was that, well, until you're able to come and visit, we'll give you a flavor for Israel, and you'll be able to connect with some Israelis or people who relate to Israel, who are interesting and have interesting stories to tell. And I think that there's been such demand that this will be ongoing. For those of you who don't know, it's also morphing into a podcast, hopefully sooner than later. We've also got some amazing programs that are not for going into depth now, but our pilot program that we started in 2018-19 is Run for Zion, which we will revive as soon as tourism and opportunities open up again to bring Christians to participate in the Jerusalem Marathon, walking and running and being part of the spectators, but making a personal connection with every step. Verses for Zion, giving a great program for Christian children to engage with Israel by learning biblical verses that relate to Israel, and the global prayer for Israel that we've had I think several episodes or versions of throughout the year so far. I certainly always welcome, we were just discussing this offline a minute ago, I always welcome people to be in touch, to visit us at genesis123.co, and to always reach out by email. This is literally meant to be a dialogue, not a monologue. So I hope that this will continue physically now as we're together on this webinar and afterward. Tonight, I probably say this about most of our programs. Tonight's program is tremendously unique, but I think this one is unique on a whole host of different levels. And why do I say that? A year ago this week, I happened to be listening to the radio here in Israel. And when I'm driving, I listen to the radio. I don't always tune in 100%. Full disclosure, my Hebrew is not fluent, so I'm not always getting everything. But I was taken aback by this person I heard on the radio who was speaking about his own personal family experience as a Lebanese Christian whose family came to Israel after Israel withdrew in its military in the year 2000. So that was on the radio a year ago because last year was the 20th anniversary. This year is a significant anniversary for our guest and friend Jonathan Elkhoury as well, because this is now 20 years since he's been in Israel. We are going to talk a little bit about a lot of things today, and I have some topics that I want to go over, but everyone's invited to ask questions. And as these conversations are just that, they're not scripts, but they're conversations, we'll see where the conversation goes. But it's interesting to be having this dialogue today, less than a week after the ceasefire from our most recent hostilities with our neighbors to the south in Gaza. And I, at least, draw a parallel between Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000 and Israel's withdrawal from Gaza 2007, 6, 7, 5, whatever year it was, 2005, 2005, and how that correlates to the violence. So we're going to discuss that. It's also important to discuss, especially this year, how Israel works with its allies, especially because whether they're all our allies or not, we've been able this past year to celebrate the achievements of the Abraham Accords, and at least 4 new countries, formally declaring a cessation of violence or normalization of relations, and other countries with which we don't have that formal public relationship yet, but we know that there are relationships. So how we deal with our allies is also a very important subtext to this conversation. If you're following, and unfortunately no one's on Facebook because we couldn't stream it now on Facebook, but anyone who is following this now has the ability to share or watching it afterward, please continue to share it because it really is going to be that important. So by way of a personal introduction, before I made Aliyah in 2004, I lived in northern New Jersey. And like most Americans, I spent a lot of time in Costco. And there was a very friendly Arab man who always was doing the checkout. I don't know if this is uniform in all Costco's, who would look at your receipt and check it off. So somehow that they knew that everything you bought, you really bought. And this man would always draw a smiley face on it, especially when I was with my kids. So we got to talking, how can you not respond to someone who's drawing smiley faces instead of just a boring check mark on your receipt? And we became actually very good friends. His name is Sammy. He's also Lebanese Christian. And Sammy told me many times, not just standing in Costco, but in our respective homes, about the suffering that he and his family went through, living in Lebanon, living under the threat of what was then the PLO, and how he always used to tell me he lost everything. Now, fortunately, he and his wife and 3 children got out, and I remember so vividly, and it's emotional even to relive it for myself. After September 11th, I don't know who was the prime minister of Israel then. I want to say it was Sharon, but I don't think it was. He said Israel needs to go in and finish off all of Hezbollah. Like that was his visceral reaction, because he understood that it's the same evil. The evil that forced him out of his country was now landed airplanes and crashed into 2 buildings not more than, 20 miles from where we both lived. So in that context, Lebanon, and the fact that I was here during much of that summer of the beginning of the Lebanon War in 1982, and one of my closest friends, who I'm still friendly with, lost his brother on the first day of that war. Lebanon as a country, Lebanese as a people, the culture, the modernity, what's been lost there, the tremendous civil war, where you seem to feel that Lebanon should have this ability to pull itself up more so than other Middle Eastern countries, has always been important to me. And therefore, Israel's presence in Lebanon and Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon and the relationships that we had and how the vacuum has been filled by Hezbollah also is important to me. And for that reason, I reached out to Jonathan Elkhoury a year ago when I heard him on the radio. I said, wow, how amazing. I want to know more. Full disclosure, he and I have not met yet. This may be the first time we're seeing each other on video. I don't think we've done a Zoom even together.
That's right.
But I look at your father as a hero of Israel. And why do I say that? And I don't know the details. You're going to share those with us. But your father was a commander in the South Lebanon Army, one of the allies of Israel in southern Lebanon that fought alongside and on behalf, well, not on behalf of Israel, but we were on the same side of the battle. And in the year 2000, 21 years ago this week, when Israel withdrew its troops in somewhat of an unglamorous way, I understand your father was brought along to come to be rescued here. Probably what would have happened if he had stayed would have been life-threatening. And a year later, you had told me when we spoke last week, you and your family were reunited with him here in Israel. Jonathan has been in Israel since he was 9 years old. He became a citizen, 9, yes?
Yes, that's correct. I'm sorry, okay. There's a lot of noise surrounding me. I hope that you will be able to hear me really good.
We're fine.
Great.
He became a citizen. He did his national service. He like me, he has a bachelor's degree. His is in political science, mine's in Middle Eastern studies. But in that way, we sort of live in our own petri dishes. We're not just living as Israeli citizens, but we study this stuff. So we kind of get to observe ourselves as cells in this international petri dish, and in a number of ways has been an unofficial ambassador of Israel with various other groups representing the truth and the reality of life in Israel, and especially the unique confluence of all the demographics that you represent. And as you'll see, which I do know enough about him already, he's bright, he's engaging, and we're in for a really good conversation. So Jonathan, thank you for making time. Where are you on the streets right now?
I am now at Rothschild in Tel Aviv.
Oh, in Tel Aviv, okay.
Yes, so we're technically close.
We are close. I should have stayed and we could have done this live. I know.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really amazing. And I want to thank you for having me on this platform. I'm really sorry for the outcome, but I'm really sure that it's going to be fantastic and we're going to have an amazing conversation.
We are. So I want to start in somewhat of a chronological order. You were very young when you left Lebanon, but you still must have vivid memories. What are they? And do you have relatives there? What's your nostalgia? I mean, there's no question you're a proud Israeli citizen, but I have to imagine you still feel very Lebanese. So how does that exist within you, and what's your orientation, and what are your memories of Lebanon?
Well, I really remember my village to begin with, my family, my village, the way that we used to go to church that was just across, the road from our house. I remember, my childhood, going to school, playing in the front yard of our house, and that's something that will always stay with me because my childhood, as I always say, was in Lebanon. But then at the age of 9, when my father fled Lebanon in May 2000, as you mentioned at the beginning, he was an officer in the South Lebanon Army. And I remember, like, the scenery of my childhood is seeing the IDF soldiers standing there, being there. And we always knew that they're there to protect us. That was something that, we weren't prevented from, we weren't, just kept aside. Although my parents really tried to keep us out of politics, to keep us, in some ways, more neutral, because they wanted us to either way, enjoy our lives and growing up in this, atmosphere. But then in May 2000, when suddenly my father left, I was only 7 years old, like on a brinch, like 4 or 5 days before my 8th birthday. And I remember that this image was shocking to me because no one expected that. And I didn't know where my father is. I didn't know where did he go to. So in a way, I just knew that my father was there one day, and the other day he wasn't there anymore for another year and 3 months till we met him again in Israel. And this whole year and 3 months of us in Lebanon without my father was crazy as well, because suddenly there's this terrorist organization that came to our villages and started entering our homes. We were always hearing stories of them coming closer and closer to our village. And in a way, my mom probably saw it coming. So she decided that it's about time for us to leave Lebanon. And it took her more than 6 months eventually to take us and be able to achieve passports and just, fly out of Lebanon to this third country. And then from there to go to the Israeli consulate and, then meet my father here in Israel.
Wait, so let me interrupt. That wasn't coordinated with Israel. You were able to get out of Lebanon and only at that point begin to say, hey, our father's in Lebanon, in Israel, and we need to go there with him? That was not a coordinated thing?
It was a rescue mission, our story of us leaving Lebanon, because eventually Israel knew that we were coming. My father have let them know. And one of the things that my father kept an Israeli cell phone. with my mom. And they would use to communicate once in a while through that phone that was an Israeli, cellular Israeli number. She would bury it in our backyard after
Wow.
after they have done patrols in our villages. She would go in the middle of the night, dig it out, call my father, like connect the phone, call my father, say that everything is okay, everything is as planned, and then close it again and bury it again in the sand. And the day that we left Lebanon, my mom even didn't share it with anyone. We didn't say goodbye to anyone from my village. We just told our family in the south, where we lived, that we're just going to Beirut for a few days. I thought that we're going to Beirut for a few days. I didn't even know. My mom didn't share that with me. As you notice, I speak a lot, so my mom was really afraid that I would like tell someone that shouldn't know, and then like we're doomed. But even when we were at the airport before flying out of Lebanon, my mom said that we're going to meet my uncle in the States. So even then, she still kept me out of the loop. The only time that I knew that we were actually going to land in Israel and meet my father in Israel was when we landed in Ben Gurion Airport. That
Wow.
was the only time that my mom told me, well, this is it. Like, we're now in Israel. And it was like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. And I was super exhausted because we haven't stopped for about 24 hours because we were making all our papers and everything. But then when we arrived at Ben Gurion Airport, we took our luggages, and my mom, we were going out of the security zone, and then my mom was like, well, here's your father. He was like literally standing in front of us. But I couldn't recognize him because he changed in this year and 3 months. He used to have a mustache and he was thin. Suddenly he's like bigger and he took off his mustache, and it was like super strange for me. But that was really emotional moment that, like one of the moments that I will always remember when our family was reunited again in Israel.
I think it's inappropriate to ask the question because I know
Feel
who you
free to
are.
ask anything. We're
No, I'm going
Israeli.
to, but to me, there's something that's still, people have to be thinking this. There's still such a paradox of someone from Lebanon coming and landing in Israel, because we don't hear that. No one's visiting from Syria, even still from Jordan and Egypt where we have peace. So from the opposite side, you're a 9-year-old boy. Of course, you were raised to understand that the Israeli side was the good side, but you were living in a society where that was not understood. Did it feel unusual? Did it feel inappropriate? Did it feel like you were any more or less safe once you were here?
Well, actually not, because the moment that we came here, the Israeli society really embraced us. They really took us into this, of like, okay, don't worry, this is your home now. We're gonna help you out if there's something that needs to be done. And immediately they started volunteering with us, taking us, to like Hebrew schools and everything. Even my school, when I came to Haifa is where my father decided that we should be located because it's a mixed city, and he wanted to be as well with the Christian community surrounding us. But suddenly the Christian community in Haifa said that they don't want anything to do with us because they considered us as traitors for helping Israel or even collaborating with Israel. So when that happened, the only schools that really opened their doors and welcomed us with huge respect was the Hebrew Jewish public schools. And I was the only Arab speaking kid in my class in 4th grade when I came to Israel.
Wow.
And so I was like sitting in class. I didn't really know anything, what is going on around me, because I didn't even know one word of Hebrew. But my teachers, like the school took me as a project, and a teacher would take me at a different time, different hour to teach me Hebrew, and to make sure that I understand what goes on. The best thing is that I didn't have to do homework for a few years. But later on, because I like really catched up fast on
Yeah.
Hebrew, they were like, okay, you can't continue with that excuse anymore. your Hebrew is even better than some of the Jewish students. So you have to do your homework. But that was like something that you felt, that you're being welcomed, that you're being helped, that they respect you and they want to know more about you, and they ask you a lot of questions, not out of digging in your life, but out of curiosity, to understand your point of view and to understand your history.
So I want to come back to that childhood piece for a minute, but it's something we'll discuss in a little bit. What you just shared was quite glaring and shocking, is that even the Christian Israeli Arabs with whom you tried to integrate then 20 years ago considered you somewhat traitors. That we're going to have to fast forward to this past couple of weeks, because there's an underlying connection to that. But go back to 4th and 5th grade. Was it easy to make friends with Jewish kids if you were the only Arab?
Well, you have to remember that when I came to Israel from this, Arab country that is an enemy to Israel, till today, I came here during the second Intifada. That was, for who didn't know about the second Intifada, that was when, there was a huge uprising by Palestinians from the territories, mainly from the West Bank or Gaza, where they had, suicide terrorists who would go to buses and explode. My brother almost was on the 37 bus in Haifa that, he missed the station in a few minutes. Otherwise, he would have been on that bus. And that was something that, now when I look at it and I understand the extent that my school took and my teachers took to make me feel not weird and not, being afraid to speak Arabic because of what is going on, in Israel at that time. So a few years ago, I met a student that used to study with me in that school. This is like from 1st grade till 7th grade, 6th grade. So I met him and he was like, yeah, like 3 days before your arrival, our teachers would have would talk to us about what's the South Lebanon Army, who's this kid that is gonna come to our school, that we need, to understand and be respectful, and they sacrificed a lot. So when I heard that at the beginning, it was like funny, like 3 days to prepare for my arrival. Am I like the Queen of England or something? But now I see it, especially because of the point and the timeline that I came to that school and what is going on. So it really showed me how much the school really wanted me to feel welcome and safe, especially more safe than just welcome.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you mentioned. I neglected to think about it being the Intifada, and someone who's identifiable as an Arab at that time was not necessarily considered friendly. So yeah, and you were a little boy, but nonetheless,
I was 9.
Correct. That could have trickled down and things blowing up all over the place. Your classmates could have said things and done things that were just insensitive because of the fear that they had. Tell us. I know a little bit, but I certainly don't know it as intimately as you. To the extent that you can talk about what your father did in the South Lebanon Army in general, can you give a little bit of a historical overview where and how that started, and and how the SLA allied with Israel?
Yeah, so the South Lebanon Army was basically created with the help of Israel officially in 1982. But this relationship started really way back before, about like 5 years ago, or like 5 years before that, when the civil war in Lebanon started and the Christians started to be persecuted, and mainly because of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that took control. Can you hear me?
Can anyone
Jonathan?
chime in if you hear us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear him.
Right, here. Right.
Which Jonathan can you hear?
We can hear you.
Ah, okay.
No, I can't hear him.
Jonathan Feldstein, you're muted. You're muted, Jonathan.
Now I'm
There
not.
You're muted.
you go.
Is Jonathan Elkhoury still with us? There,
I'm
good.
here.
Great. Okay, so I don't know where we got cut off, but you were talking about, last I heard was 1982 and 5 years before during the Civil War.
Yeah, so during the Civil War, the Palestinian Liberation Organization started targeting the Christians. He started doing that before. Eventually, that was what ignited the Lebanese Civil War. And doing that, the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army have left completely and kind of faded away from South Lebanon, leaving it to the PLO. It was used to call Fatah land because it was occupied by the PLO. And so once we were started to see that we can't win that war, and we see that Israel is facing the same enemy because they used to fight Katyusha rockets towards northern Israel, to Kiryat Shmona. They have executed terror attacks in Nahariya, and out of that, wanting to live in peace together, our parents decided to reach out to Israel. So the connection started when a Christian from a small village, a Maronite village in South Lebanon, went to the border. He wrote a note, and then he wrapped it with a rock and he threw it over the fence, because Lebanon and Israel are border, like have a border, mutual border. And the next day, every day the IDF has like these rounds on the border to check if everything is as it should be. And they found this rock with a letter on it, and they gave it to who was in charge, the officer who was in charge there. And in the letter, it was said that they want to help each other against this common enemy, because we are looking for having connections and being with peace between Israel and Lebanon. That was something that was really common at that time. We almost signed a peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon in May 1982. But then the Lebanese president was assassinated out of it. And unfortunately, till that day, we weren't able to do so. But this connection started out of this need, more than need, but this, something that our parents just were sick of war. They didn't want to live in war. They didn't want their children to be in war. So that's how they connected with Israel. Being minorities in the Middle East, being targeted by the same terrorist organization, made us have this amazing connection. Because eventually the South Lebanon Army and the Christians in South Lebanon and in Lebanon in general were the first to ever recognize Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, wanting to have a peace agreement with, wanting to have a normalization ties with. Not like, the peace agreement with Jordan and Egypt, but more as, what is going on today with the UAE, that it's much more than a peace agreement, it's a normalization between the people themselves. And that's what we wished for and we wanted to. But between that time, the PLO was kicked out of Lebanon, and instead of the gap that was created there, Hezbollah took over and started targeting IDF soldiers and South Lebanon Army soldiers as well, leading to 18 years of Israeli presence in South Lebanon, in what it's used to call the security belt in South Lebanon, or the security zone, leading eventually to the withdrawal of Israel in a one-sided decision in May 2000. And that point was, for us, when we remember a few days ago, we had the memorial of the withdrawal, that we now are trying to change it from, instead, just remembering the withdrawal, we're making a ceremony for our 550 fallen soldiers. That's something that we do every year, and we always do it really close by to the date of the withdrawal, because this is something that we want to remember what they fought for, what they were dreaming about, what kind of life they wish to have.
Jonathan, when you speak about that, when we who you mentioned in a private conversation we had, the SLA community in Israel, is that who you're talking about, and who does that
Yes.
include, and how many people, and what's the relationship among Olim from Lebanon?
So we are about 680 families of the South Lebanon Army. At the beginning, in 2008, 2000, at the withdrawal, we had 8,000 people coming to Israel from Lebanon. But today, these 680 families resemble only about 2,800, 3,000 people. We are what's called the Ashkenazis of the Middle East. We have 1 or 2 child, maybe like top 3 children. This is our numbers, and we are located mainly in the northern of Israel, in Nahariya, Kiryat Shmona, next to the Sea of Galilee, in Haifa, in Ma'alot. So these are like the main areas of the South Lebanon Army families. We live in a majority of a Jewish population cities, and we all went to Jewish public schools. 95% of us go to the military or national service. I served in national service for 2 years. My brother served in the military service for 3 years. And that's something that, we really believe that we need to be part of the community and the country that we are living in. So this is something that is really burning from within, that we learned from our parents, to be involved in our community, to make sure that, if we want our community to thrive, we have to push as well and make it thrive with us together. And that's what makes us, have this drive to do stuff.
Do you feel, I want to get into the more of the current situation, but I can't, and I didn't know this, so I can't not go back to your own initial absorption here with among other Christian Arabs. Do you feel a great rift between yourselves as Lebanese Arabs versus people who are, if you will, indigenous Israeli Arabs, or is there a getting along? Are you still viewed as traitors?
So because since we came here, we didn't keep silent. We kept sharing our stories. We kept on talking about it, because we didn't have the media back in the 70s, 80s, 90s to share what was going on with us in South Lebanon, and that we were targeted by the PLO and Hezbollah. So once we started talking about it, a lot of people understood that and kind of accepted it, mainly from the Arab population. So now we can see more Christians or Muslims from the South Lebanon Army communities that get married to Muslims or Christians that are Israelis or like native Israelis.
Right.
But eventually, we still, keep our traditions. We still keep our Lebanese language. Even after 20 years, we still speak Lebanese Arabic. And no matter who we speak with, we make sure to speak the Lebanese Arabic, because this is us, and we want to keep that living. Because eventually we are a small amount of people.
Yes.
But I do feel that there's a little bit of a gap, because, for example, when things like what happened in previous weeks in Israel happens, I suddenly find myself in between 2 words. One side is the Jewish Israeli side, that, although I'm more connected to it, but I feel that in particular at that moment, I kind of feel not connected to, because usually the fight is, because what is going on with anti-Semitism around the world or everything. So I'm not facing that, but I am facing anti-Israeli when I'm speaking about Israel in general. And on the other hand, there's the Arab side, where I don't feel part as well because I'm not indigenous to Israel. I wasn't born here, so I don't have the feelings that they have about, their history, about what is going on in Gaza or the West Bank, because some of them might be their families. So in that matter, I like feel like really in between these two words, and sometimes I'm afraid from both worlds when from especially from extremists, because the majority of people, and I believe I'm really optimistic about it. The majority, I believe, of both Arabs and Jews are really looking to have shared life together. Not out of, because this is what it is, but because they really want to have this like common interests
Right.
and, common future with Arabs and Jews living in Israel. But there are some small amount of extremists, mainly Arab extremists, that went and did huge riots all over the mixed cities, in particular
Right.
in Israel, in Akko, in Haifa, in Yafo, in Jerusalem, some of East Jerusalem as well, and that's something broke a lot of maybe optimism in the Jewish side, where they saw, okay, what is going on? This is like an intifada all over again.
Yeah.
But this time, it's not an external intifada; it's an
Correct.
internal one with Israeli Arabs.
Correct.
So I feel the Jews that are being concerned about it. And from the other hand, there were my Arab friends that were really afraid of as well being attacked because of one lynch that happened in Givatayim or
Bat Yam.
Bat of one lynch that was done by Jewish people on an Arab guy.
Correct.
And that made them into stress. So suddenly the silent majority that are against these violent acts
Right.
kept silent because they were afraid to be targeted both by the Arabs and both by the extremist Jews.
So, okay, so that's real interesting. And you, I mean, I am here, it's ironic, I'm here not that much less than you, but I'm new and I feel more, of course, naturally the Jewish kinship and part of the Jewish history. And I agree as far as everything you said, and that I believe most people want to coexist, but I feel that many Israelis, maybe even most Israelis, and also particularly because maybe it's happened during this ongoing protracted political season that we've got, feel like the rug has been pulled out from us and the whole room has been reset. And I'm not sure how, but I needed to take a point. So just in the chance, because most of you who I know were following recent events in Israel, were following the rockets being fired from Gaza and Israel responding. And if you're following from overseas, you probably heard about Israel's disproportionate response and what have you. You probably didn't hear that there were riots and lynchings going on, and several Israelis badly beaten up, Jews and Arabs. A couple of people died. Synagogues were synagogues in Ramla, or I don't even remember what.
In Lod.
Lod
yeah.
were attacked. Someone took out a Torah scroll and destroyed that. I mean, really giving Jews the feeling. I'm so glad what you said, what you did, Jonathan, about Arabs feeling afraid, because one of my kids was going into Jerusalem. I don't remember who, and I felt very uneasy. And before you came on, someone was asking the question. My brother is not far from you and went running in this morning. And I said to myself, he better not go to Jaffa, right? Which is a shame. How horrible, because we do. But do you really believe that the tension that came out was only from extremists, or is there an underlying feeling that's been brewing and now it just exploded?
So, well, the way that I feel that, and I believe that it's actually this way, is because when we've seen a few deep analysis surveys done on the Arab street in regard to their identity, whether they feel Israelis or they feel Palestinians or they feel just Arabs or they feel both Palestinians and Israelis, about 60 to 70% of Arabs said that they feel somewhat, both Israelis and Palestinians, or others that said that they feel completely Israelis. And only about 30% said that they're only Palestinians or Arabs.
Correct.
So that's what makes me feel and understand that this is more complicated than it actually is. So I think it will be a good, we can see in a little bit, in a few months, when a deep survey like that will be published again, to check how the Arab population is feeling towards Israel. And we need to check how the Jewish population feels towards Arabs. Because I'm sure after this, I know many of my friends, and this is really heartbreaking because I can't blame them, that lived in Lod. And some of them were, they went outside to protect their homes because every night they would come to their villages, throw rockets to their windows, torch down their cars, and they would target only Jewish places. I used to work in Akko, in a hotel called Effendi. The hotel is owned by Uri Jeremias. He's the owner of Uri Buri restaurant in Akko as well. And Uri's restaurant was the first restaurant to be attacked in the old city of Akko. His restaurant has been standing there for 30 years. He is the biggest symbol of coexistence that we know of in Israel. He's like huge famous in Israel and around the world. Right. And he always, talks about this connection between Arabs and Jews. And only a week before, he was in an iftar dinner with sheikhs from the Muslim community, speaking about coexistence, and not just speaking, but making coexistence. And that's like the difference, not just talking about it, but actually doing it.
Right.
And eventually, after his restaurant was 100% completely turned down by fire, his hotel as well was a Molotov cocktail was thrown to the door, and the hotel was completely full, and one of the guests is still under he's in
intensive care.
In intensive care in the hospital in Rambam Facility Hospital. Still till today, he didn't wake up yet. It was like 11 days ago, and so even after that, I've went there the next day to help him out because I used to live in one of his apartments. He's a really dear, he's like my grandfather, and talking to him later, it made me understand, he lost both his businesses, but it's not just business, it's like his life.
Yep.
Right. And he worked all his life to achieve this connection and coexistence between Arabs and Jews. But when he was asked, what do you think about that Arabs came and took down your places that are a symbol of coexistence, he said, well, I had more Arabs that helped me take the fire out than Arabs that lit the fire.
Okay.
So in that way, it makes you look at it on a different perspective.
Yeah.
Of, he's been through a lot. I mean, he's I think 75. He's been through like Israeli wars. He's been to both the first and second Intifada. And because I saw his optimism, I kind of make myself, try and look at it from a different angle.
So that's amazing. Thank you for that very personal experience. I mean, all of this is, but to be able to reflect that. I wanted to, so Dave Garmis is asking about a difference in the thoughts of young versus older Israeli Arabs in the demographics. I want to ask if you see that, but when you were talking before about the identity of Israeli Arabs and talking about how most it's correct. Most Israeli Arabs identify as Israeli. And I think we saw in the last election, 3 months ago, however long ago that was, a bit of an affirmation of that with a rejection of the joint list, this combined conglomerate of 4 different parties. And albeit that the one that broke away and decided to run on its own is an Islamist party. It's an Islamist party that advocates for integration of Israeli Arabs into Israeli society even more, and they did surprisingly well with 4 seats in the Knesset. Do you think it, so? Can you comment on the demographic piece and to what extent you agree or disagree that the election of that party called Ram is perhaps a harbinger of a positive feeling of Israeli Arabs to want to be part of the society?
So I have to start with, and on a personal note, I disagree with Mansour Abbas, with the head of Ram party, almost on everything, except his ways on starting to connect the Arab population in Israel, because he from the first minute that he started to split out of the joint list, he said that he wants and interested in having Arabs represented in the parliament, not the parliament, but in the government.
Yes.
Because you have to make a coalition, and up to this day, all Arab parties refuse to sit in any government, no matter if it was a left-wing government or a right-wing government.
Correct.
But suddenly came this man that he's homophobic and he's extremist.
He's a hardcore Islamist.
Yes. So he suddenly said, no, well, this is about time that we have to have a representative and be part of the Israeli politics and be capable of having decisions on our lives as Israeli citizens. That was something that was like extremely new, that was said by an Arab politician from an Arab list. And it kind of changed a lot during the campaigns. And that's why, for example, the joint list have received only 6 seats. Out of, they used to be 15. They used to be 15 with Mansour Abbas.
Correct.
Now, without Mansour Abbas has 4 and they have 6. So it's 10. Like 5 electorals didn't go to, this is huge amount of Arabs that didn't go to vote.
Right.
Because they were lost in a way. Because they still didn't know what's Mansour Abbas's game. And on the other hand, they felt frustrated by the joint list that didn't really do anything to the Arab population. So if I want to fast forward to what is going on now, Mansour Abbas he went to a synagogue that was torched down in the attacks in Lod. He was interviewed from that synagogue saying that he will participate in trying to help the synagogue run again, and fund it and help, raise money and help clean it out. That was something that we have never seen, even from the most moderate Arab members of parliament.
Correct.
And even throughout the riots, throughout what was going on, Mansour Abbas and both Isawi Fridj from the Meretz left-wing party went on TV and said, guys, you need to relax. You need to take the heat down. The violence is not the right way to do it. They were the only ones. And, surprisingly, Ayman Odeh, that is the head of the joint list and the head of Hadash, that is considered to be, a left moderate wing party, stood there and kind of, in a way, encouraged the Shabab. That's what they were, the rioters were called.
Right.
The Shabab, it means, the youngsters. Because these attacks were done by 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. It wasn't the seniors that were, remembering their parents' stories or wanting to have like a liberation. No, it was youngsters, stupid ones, that some of them were just bored and decided, hey, yeah, well, it's fun because the majority of the things were published on TikTok and they wanted to get a lot of attention. So a lot of them did that from that position. And 85% of these rioters were known to the police. They had previous convictions. So it means that that's why I'm still keeping some kind of a hope, because this is not normal or typical Arab citizens of Israel. Remember, we have almost 2 million Arab citizens of Israel. We're 25% of the Israeli population.
Right.
This is huge amount. So when you look at it, and not for only from the macro, but from the micro point of view, you can see a completely different perspective.
It's a great perspective and actually very encouraging. So thank you for that. We could go on a lot. I want to leave time for questions from the people who are joining, but I have one more particular question. You spoke before about being on both sides, understanding the Jewish perspective, understanding an Arab perspective, and yet you're also Lebanese. Are you okay?
Sorry, but my friend was just leaving, so.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So as a Lebanese Christian, first of all, you didn't answer the question earlier. Do you still have family in Lebanon?
Oh yeah, all my family is in Lebanon.
Okay, so
except my parents and my brother that are in Israel, and one uncle that is in the States.
And you're in touch with your family?
No, not directly.
Not directly.
We are afraid that they're being targeted. We know that they're being targeted because of us, so we don't want to have any trouble. So we're trying to keep our distance. So we only just call my uncle in the States and make sure that they're okay, and that's how we make the connection.
Okay, I'm sorry that that's the situation, but we've just gone through the situation in Gaza, not to get into a whole breakdown of Israel's military response in Gaza, but we know that Hezbollah has many times more rockets that are much more sophisticated, long range, and precise than our neighbors in Gaza had and ever had. And they will at some point actually potentially use them. And it has to be, I think it's intuitive that our response from Israel will be that much more severe because of the potential of Hezbollah to shoot off in a day the number of rockets that Hamas fired in the course of 11 days. How does that make you feel? I mean, you have family there. It's your country. You still have a sense of nostalgia, even though you're here. You're a proud Israeli and an ambassador for Israel. But how does that make you feel for the country of your birth?
Frustrated, to begin with. I think that's similar to the feeling that I had in 2006 with the Second Lebanon War, when Hezbollah kidnapped 3 soldiers and Israel launched a war to return them back. And this is something that it's like because the places that Hezbollah launches its rockets from is from within the territories where our family lives. They go into populated areas. Although we know, and we have seen it now in Gaza, that the IDF does everything in its power and abilities, and even sometimes, abort missions not to hurt any civilians, it's still frightening because, they have nowhere else to go. The other, place that maybe they can go is to Beirut, but eventually in this war, it's going to be a general war where all of Lebanon is going to be participating, because Benny Gantz said today that if something like that happened, Lebanon will be destroyed, because eventually, I think it's like by international law as well, Lebanon is responsible for what happens in their own territory. So on the one hand, I'm like, yes, Lebanon needs to be taking responsibility on what's going on. They need to take back their, sovereignty on their land. But on the other hand, I really want Hezbollah out, because this is the only way that I will be able to go back and visit. But I want something back to go and visit, and not, So this is huge frustration in all different perspectives, because we're going to be here targeted by thousands of missiles a day. And what Hassan Nasrallah did this operation was to sit aside, check every TV possible, every news broadcast possible that were showing how Iron Dome is acting, especially when Hamas was shooting hundreds of rockets at the same moment.
Yes.
and he's checking how the machinery is working.
Yes.
And now he has more awareness and knowledge on how maybe to try and break it. I'm sure that the IDF is way advanced than this thinking, but this is something that we need to take into consideration.
Thank you. I want to open up for any questions from the people who are here. Unfortunately, again, we're not live on Facebook, but this will be published. But anyone who's here, who's joining us, have any questions that you'd like to put in the chat or unmute yourself and ask? Okay, so if not, then before we close out with Linda Chandler, Pastor Linda Chandler, who's going to pray, you've done this multiple times over the course of this conversation, Jonathan. You always, and I think it's very natural for you, to return to something that's positive, that's something that's hopeful. But what is your hope? We're sitting here almost 20 years ago exactly from when you came to Israel, and 21 years ago to the week from when your father fled along with thousands of Israeli troops from Lebanon. What's your hope? And what's it? Although I want to make it more complicated, not like dream. What do you dream about? But what's the practical hope? How do you see us moving along?
Well, I have maybe to begin with like a short story of why I'm this way. Well, my father is really close. We're really close with my father and my mother because, you know, eventually it's only the four of us here. So we always sit down and talk about the situation, about what is going on. We talk about even Christianity, talk about the Bible, not in a, you know, spiritual way, in a like theological way as well, to like check on this is our history, this is our heritage. But he always said to me, no matter what, like never live the past. You know, we have been through a lot, our family. My mom have been, you know, fleeing. She fled her village and then she fled her country, and we fled our country as well. So he always said, you have to remember the past, but you're not allowed to live it. You can't live it. You always have to make sure to tell your story, but you always have to look forward and make sure that you're building a positive and a good life. And that's something that, you know, is always there in my mind. So I'm always trying to look for you know, the better side. Although it could be like the darkest moment, although sometimes, especially like in the 5 days of this operation and what was going on inside of Haifa, I couldn't publish anything because I didn't really know how to connect my thoughts. So even though when that happens, I really try to keep on the positive side. And my hopes eventually is actually, you know, that being back to Lebanon, this is something that I really hope for and see that could happen because of the public opinion that is changing towards Israel and Lebanon. Even though we had this operation, and eventually, although, you know, Hezbollah right now, he's not attacking Israel because his public opinion is not in his favor. And I'm really hoping for that to continue. You know, one man's problems is the other man's happiness. So I really hope that Hezbollah will continue to suffer. And that way we can liberate Lebanese people, and we can go visit back our village.
Well, then the borders can be open.
I will take you there.
That would be nice. Christian Arab relations. So there's a great question from Forrest McNeil about publications. Do you have any recommendations about publications or sources that people can learn about Christian Arabs' relations with Jews and Arab Muslims? Is there anything that I'd have to go back to my college reading list for some of that, but is there anything that jumps out in your mind?
Well, the only thing that jumps right away is the Moshe Dayan Center. They are Middle East studies that are connected to Tel Aviv University. I have just published my first like academic article at the Moshe Dayan Center. but it's mainly focused on social media. My essay
Okay.
was on social media, but they have a lot of different publications all over the Middle East. And it's really interesting to see, and a lot of them are in English. So it's
Great.
really interesting to see. Beehive, that's what it's called, of the Moshe Dayan Center.
Great. Thank you for that. So folks, as we started, this is a dialogue. This has been fabulous, Jonathan. I'm so grateful. It's really a delight, and I look forward to being able to do this in person, with or without cameras, but just to get to know you. And I'm grateful for you. I think we all are. I want to invite Pastor Linda Chandler in Austin, who is an executive board member of the Genesis 123 Foundation, and in whose church you spoke, to close us out with, before I just make some final announcements, with prayer and offering.
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, it was really glad to hear you. I don't know if you remember being in Austin, Texas, but
Yeah, of
when
course.
I think it's the reservist, and you had a whole group of Arab, Christian, Druze, Muslim, and it was a wonderful time in our little church. And it's good to see you. And
I think we're friends on Facebook.
yeah, to know you're alive. Yeah, I do keep up with you some.
Yeah.
So it's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that you published an article and you're doing it. I think what I want to just say here, though, I know that we all kind of carefully step around any kind of theological or because of our honor and respect. But I would say, and because I'm going to pray, I heard a rabbi not very long ago when all this started happening several weeks ago, and he said, he named some of the different problems, but he said, really, it's a spiritual problem. And if you really go down to everything, it's a spiritual problem of not listening to God to love all people and to honor one another, even in our differences. So I'm just, let me pray, and I'll be glad to do that. And I'm just so thankful to hear from you today. Lord, we just come before you today, and we just ask you to come to our aid, Lord, in all of this. There's so much going on, but truthfully, you love all your children. And so, Lord, we just ask you today that you would come to our aid. You're the God of the universe. Look upon us. Show us the light of your mercies. Put all the nations that don't want to look to you and to submit to your grace and your love, Lord, that they would just be come in dread of you, Lord. Maybe the fear of the Lord would come down in a way that just shakes us all into a revelation that you are God of all creation and you love your children, all of them. So, Lord, we just ask you just to gather us, to show mercy to the people that are specifically called by your name, that we love you, Lord, and we're looking to you to help us work this out. I know, Lord, though, that you put inside of us a beacon of light and to be a light to all nations. So let us light each other with love, honor, and respect. Hear the prayer, Lord, of your servants. Protect those that need to be protected. Lord, I pray for Lebanon right now. It's a beautiful country, and Lord, they're just in captivity. And so, Lord, we know that you're the God of freedom. So set them free, Lord. Help us all to be set free, to live in peace, Lord. You are our peace. Hear our prayer, for you are ever gracious to your people. And we just thank you, Lord. And I ask you to bless Jonathan from the top of his head to the tip of his toes and in everything that he does. And Lord, bless our Jonathan tonight, and just for all that he does to get us as Christians and Jews together, to stand together and to call into other brothers and sisters of the Muslim faith and others, just to come and let us sit down at the table together and love and respect with one another. And we just ask this in your mighty name. Amen and amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to just say too, that if you're listening here tonight, or this afternoon, that, I just watched the videos. You need to go and watch them that Jonathan has posted today about where he's gone in and given aid to, those in Sarat that have taken the brunt of all the rockets that came from Gaza. He's gone in and there's one particular one of a grocery store that he is friends with, and taken in gift certificates from Genesis 1-2-3, and let them know that we all care, both Jews and Christians alike, and that we're there for people in need. And it was wonderful to hear the manager there, and he said, this is like giving us a breath of fresh air and encouragement. So I want to encourage everybody that's listening here tonight, that you and others, a great thing to do is to give to Genesis123.co and underscore our faith and trust in the Lord, not just through our prayers, but even through our financial deeds that show literally tangible evidence that we do care, and we want to encourage those that are right in the middle of this battleground, and both for all people there. So I just encourage you tonight to go to Genesis123.co and hit that donation button, or have your friends. If you're looking for a cause in your church or anywhere else, this is a great way to do that. And I totally believe in giving to this. And it made me excited today to know that I might be across the world, but I was a part of that giving.
Yes.
When Jonathan went and did his thing. So thank you, Jonathan, for all you do as you represent us.
Thank you. Yeah, just to close it out, for those who didn't know what Linda was necessarily mentioning in the there at the end, if you go to the Genesis 123 Foundation Facebook page, you'll see, I think we did 8 videos yesterday from Sderot on behalf of the Genesis 123 Foundation, taking the proceeds that came in from our emergency fund to begin to disperse them. And we've done some incredible things, and we're going to continue to do incredible things. Obviously, thank you to those who participated, and certainly ask everyone to share that. That's been made this week busy. We observed the anniversary of the withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000, and there was another wonderful, historic, incredible anniversary for Israel and the Jewish people. Also yesterday, the beginning of Operation Solomon, the rescue of nearly 15,000 Ethiopian Jews who came here 30 years ago this week. And that was extraordinary. And if you've been following, we've been doing a campaign and a program on behalf of Ethiopian Jews for the last few months. Originally, we were intending to wind it down this week, but because there's so much more interest as a result of the 30th anniversary, and because the last 3 weeks have been preoccupied with war-related things, we've put it on pause. And I just ask anyone that wants to be involved with that as we continue to share that story and continue to do our part on behalf of Ethiopian Jews, hosting webinars and other conversations, to please be in touch with me personally. But I'm going to say goodnight. It's late for Jonathan and myself here, and I'm just always so grateful for all of you.
Good night for you all.
For joining.
Yes, good night. Stay
Good
safe.
night, everybody. Good
Thank
night.
you for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Good night.
God bless you.